The German pilots laughed when they first saw it. From the black and white photos smuggled out of America, the new fighter looked absurd. A twin-boom monster with propellers spinning on each side and a cockpit that sat in a thin pod between them, like some mechanical insect that had lost its symmetry. It didn't resemble any aircraft they knew. To them it looked slow, heavy, and awkward. A joke of an airplane. But on the other side of the Atlantic, in a quiet California valley filled with dust and heat, a handful of engineers were building something that would change the skies forever. It began in 1938, when the U.S. Army issued a challenge no one thought possible. They wanted a fighter that could reach 20,000 feet in under 6 minutes, fly faster than 400 miles per hour, and carry enough guns to tear apart a bomber in seconds. To most aircraft companies it was madness. But at Lockheed, a young engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson looked at the request and smiled. He believed that if the Americans wanted a miracle, they'd have to be bold enough to build one. Johnson sketched the first lines of what would become the P-38 Lightning on a yellow pad, his pencil racing as ideas sparked. 2 engines for reliability, twin booms for structural balance, a central cockpit to hold the pilot. A radical design that defied every convention of fighter building. His colleagues stared in disbelief. "It looks wrong," one said. "It looks fast," Johnson replied. The prototype, called the XP-38, was finished within months. When it rolled out of the hangar for the first time, sunlight flashed off its polished metal like a blade. Test pilot Ben Kelsey climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and taxied to the runway. The twin Allison engines roared to life, their combined thunder shaking the ground. As the Lightning lifted from Muroc Dry Lake, the onlookers could only stare. The plane climbed almost vertically, slicing through the desert air with impossible grace. Within weeks, it broke the transcontinental speed record, flying from California to New York in 7 hours. The newspapers called it a twin-engine miracle. The Army called it the future. Yet not everyone was convinced. Many pilots thought the Lightning was too complex, too strange. "You'll never win a dogfight with 2 engines," one said. But time would prove them wrong. Beneath its smooth aluminum skin lay the secret that would make it deadly. A concentrated nose battery of 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, all firing straight ahead. Unlike other fighters whose wing-mounted guns required precise convergence distance, every bullet from the Lightning's guns traveled on the same line of fire. A P-38 pilot could pour destruction into a target half a mile away with mathematical precision. When the first photos of the Lightning reached Europe, German intelligence officers gathered around them with amusement. "What are the Americans thinking?" one Luftwaffe captain sneered. "A flying twin-boom toy?" They dismissed it instantly. Their Messerschmitt Bf-109s had already conquered the skies of Poland and France. Their Focke-Wulfs ruled the Channel coast. The Luftwaffe believed no foreign machine could threaten them. To them, the P-38 was an oddity, a curiosity. But they had underestimated not just the plane but the nation that built it. In 1941, as war spread across the globe, the Lightning began its journey from California hangars to distant airfields. It was first deployed to Britain, then to North Africa, where the desert sun shimmered across its silver wings. The first combat missions were rough. The engine struggled with unfamiliar fuels, the superchargers needed fine-tuning, and pilots had to master the quirks of twin-engine flight. Some Lightnings were lost before they ever met the enemy. But for every failure, Lockheed's engineers learned something new. Kelly Johnson personally read pilot reports, making changes overnight, sending redesigned parts across the Atlantic faster than the mail could carry them. Bit by bit, the Lightning evolved from experiment to predator. German pilots first met it over Tunisia. They saw a flash of sunlight in the distance, then 2 contrails spiraling toward them. At first, they thought it was 2 planes flying close together. Then, as it grew larger, they realized it was one, the strange twin-boom silhouette they had mocked. The P-38's pilot throttled forward, engines screaming in harmony. 8 guns lit up the sky, tracers streaking in perfect alignment. The German fighter exploded before it could even break formation. Survivors who returned to base reported a nightmare. "It came from below the sun," one said. "At first, we didn't understand what it was. It was everywhere." Soon the Luftwaffe learned the Lightning's true name. They called it der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. The name spread quickly among pilots, whispered in radio chatter, painted in squadron mess halls. What had once been laughter turned into fear. The Americans had brought something new to the fight, and it was unlike anything the Germans had faced before. The Lightning could climb higher than the Messerschmitts, dive faster than the Focke-Wulfs, and chase bombers all the way home. But to understand why it worked so well, you had to look at its mind, the design philosophy behind every rivet. Kelly Johnson had built it for range, speed, and versatility. Each of its engines drove a counter-rotating propeller, eliminating torque spin and giving it perfect stability. It could lose one engine and still fly home. It could carry bombs, cameras, or rockets. And it was the first fighter with truly effective turbo superchargers, allowing it to breathe and fight even at altitudes where other engines gasped for air. In the Pacific, the Lightning became a legend for another reason. Endurance. Over endless stretches of ocean where most single-engine fighters would have fallen into the sea of hit, the P-38's twin engines meant survival. Pilots called it their guardian angel. But in 1942, few still knew its name. The headlines belonged to Spitfires and Mustangs. The Lightning was still the underdog, too strange, too new. And yet, quietly, it was writing the opening lines of a story that would end in domination. Back in Germany, Luftwaffe aces still mocked it. Too heavy, they said. It can't turn. But the truth was different. In high-speed dives, the Lightning could reach 600 miles per hour, far beyond the safe limits of most aircraft. Its long wings gave it stability, its turbo-superchargers thrust. When German pilots tried to follow a diving P-38, their wings shuddered, their controls froze, and many never pulled out. What they didn't understand was that the Lightning had discovered something new, compressibility, the frontier of flight speed. American pilots learned to ride the edge of physics, using dive flaps to recover where others couldn't. The result was terrifying. They could strike, vanish, and climb again before their enemies knew what happened. In late 1942, as the U.S. entered the European War, the P-38 found its true stage. Flying from bases in England, they escorted bombers across the Channel. For the first time, the Luftwaffe faced a fighter that could match their altitude, range, and power. In the cold, thin air over France, German pilots who once mocked the fork-tailed toy found themselves trapped in its crosshairs. American squadrons like the 1st and 14th Fighter Groups scored kill after kill. Each mission proved the Lightning wasn't a joke. It was evolution. And yet, the pilots who flew it knew the price of that power. The cockpit was small, unpressurized, freezing at altitude. The controls were heavy, the visibility poor in turns. But they loved it because it brought them home. Time and again, damaged Lightnings limped back across the Channel on one engine, smoke trailing behind, their pilots shaking but alive. The mechanics would swarm around them, eyes wide at the bullet holes stitched. Through the fuselage, the engine cowls burned, the wings shredded, and still the plane had flown. "You can't kill a Lightning," they'd say, wiping oil from their hands. For German intelligence, disbelief turned to study. They dissected every report, every photograph. They tried to copy its twin-boom structure in wind tunnel models but failed to match its balance. "It should not work," one engineer muttered. And yet it does. By the time 1943 dawned, the laughter had stopped. The sky above Europe was changing. The Americans were coming in numbers no one could have imagined. Bombers by the hundreds, fighters by the wings. And leading them, shining silver in the sunlight, were the planes the Germans once laughed at. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the devil with two tails, was no longer a curiosity. It was a symbol of a nation's awakening industrial might, of a generation that turned ridicule into power. The same engineers who had sketched it on a scrap of paper were now watching their creation roar across the Atlantic, carrying the hopes of a world desperate for freedom. In the months ahead, its legend would only grow. It would hunt submarines in the Atlantic, stalk bombers over Germany, and chase Japanese fighters through tropical storms. But in 1942, as the first Lightnings returned from their missions over Tunisia and France, the truth was already written across the scarred faces of the men who flew them. They said it looked strange, one pilot murmured, stepping from his cockpit, boots crunching on the sand. They were right. Strange and unstoppable. The laughter that once echoed in Luftwaffe hangars had faded into silence. Somewhere above the clouds, two silver contrails twisted and merged, vanishing into the sun. A reminder that in war as in life, the things that seem strangest often become the most dangerous. The sky had a new ruler now, born not of imitation but imagination, and the world would never again underestimate the sound of twin engines screaming in unison. By 1943, the air over Europe had become a graveyard of machines. From the English coast to the gray edges of the Rhine, the sky was a killing field where aluminum burned and men vanished in smoke. Every dawn began the same way, the rumble of hundreds of bombers lifting off from fog-covered airfields in Britain, their bellies filled with explosives and their hearts protected by the slim hope of fighter escort. The Americans called it daylight precision bombing. The Germans called it suicide. 4 months, the B-17s and B-24s flew alone, cut to pieces by Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs before they could even reach their targets. But then came the Lightning. The first time the P-38s crossed the Channel in full formation, they looked like silver arrows drawn across the sky. Each one shimmered in the cold morning sun, their twin engines humming in harmony. The bomber crews below cheered through their oxygen masks, watching the strange fork-tailed shapes flying above them like guardian angels. For the first time in months, they weren't alone. The Luftwaffe, however, was waiting. Over Lille and Rouen, over the gray patchwork fields of France, German radar picked up the incoming raids and scrambled interceptors. Dozens of Bf-109s climbed into the thin air, their pilots confident as ever. They had fought Spitfires, Mustangs, Thunderbolts, they feared none. But this was new. As they reached 25,000 feet, they saw the bombers ahead, and behind them, a line of glinting dots closing fast. At first, they thought it was two groups flying in perfect synchronization. Then they realized those dots were single aircraft, and each one carried the silhouette they once mocked. Schwanz, one German shouted over the radio, 2 tails. Within seconds the sky erupted. The P-38s hit first, diving from altitude with the speed of falling meteors. 8.50 caliber guns unleashed torrents of fire, cutting through German formations before they could even break. The first Messerschmitt to take a hit exploded mid-turn, its wings shearing off in a spiral of smoke. The second disintegrated under the concentrated nose guns of Captain Robin Olds, one of the youngest Lightning aces, whose calm voice crackled over the radio. Splash 1. In less than 5 minutes, 6 German fighters were gone. Those who survived dove away shaken. They had never seen anything move like that, not a twin-engine bomber, but a predator that hunted like a single-engine fighter and bit like a pack of wolves. The legend of the fork-tailed devil was no myth. It was real and it was hungry. The Lightning's secret lay not just in its power, but its psychology. When a Luftwaffe pilot saw 2 contrails twisting toward him, his mind hesitated. The shape was alien, confusing. Was it 2 planes? Was it a bomber? That moment of doubt, that fraction of a second, was all a P-38 pilot needed. He'd pull up, roll, and unleash a line of tracer fire that tore through engines and cockpits before the enemy even understood what was happening. German reports began to describe strange encounters. It climbed too fast, one read. It came from the sun and vanished into the clouds. Another simply said, we could not outdive it. The German high command, realizing the danger, began ordering pilots to attack only when outnumbering the Lightnings. But by then, outnumbering Americans was becoming impossible. The factories back home were producing planes faster than the Germans could shoot them down. Still, the Lightning's war wasn't easy. Its pilots faced brutal odds, flak, cold, mechanical failures, and endless miles over enemy territory. Many never came back. Those who did carried haunted eyes and frozen hands, their oxygen masks crusted with frost, their flight suits soaked with sweat. They learned to respect their machine like a living thing. The Lightning could save you or kill you depending on how you treated it. Hold too hard in a dive and you'd hit compressibility, the controls freezing solid, the plane refusing to respond as the air thickened around it. More than one P-38 was lost that way, spiraling into the earth while its pilot screamed helplessly. But Lockheed responded again. Engineers in Burbank studied the problem and created a simple, brilliant solution: dive recovery flaps. With them, the Lightning could now ride the edge of physics itself, diving faster than any aircraft in history and living to tell about it. By mid-1943, the Luftwaffe began to notice a change. Their own pilots were dying faster. Aces who had once mocked the Americans were now falling to them. In one mission over Italy, Lightnings escorting bombers to Naples met a formation of Me-109s head-on. The Germans tried their old tactic, a frontal attack. But the P-38s held formation and fired early. Their concentrated nose guns created a wall of fire the Germans couldn't break through. 7 Messerschmitts fell in under 2 minutes. When the survivors landed, their commander said quietly, "We have met the devil in the sky." The Lightning's legend grew in every theater. In the Pacific, it hunted Japanese Zeros with surgical precision. In Europe, it escorted bombers all the way to Germany long before the Mustang arrived. But perhaps the most haunting stories came from the men who flew it. Major Thomas McGuire, one of America's top aces, called it the perfect hunter. Richard Bong, who would become the highest-scoring American ace of the war, simply said, "It feels alive." They pushed it to its limits, chasing enemy planes through cloud and thunder, across mountains and overseas. The P-38 became an extension of their will, a weapon of survival and vengeance. For the Germans, it was something else entirely, a psychological weapon. Pilots began reporting that they could identify a Lightning even from miles away by the sunlight glinting off its twin tails. They would feel a chill in their stomachs, a sense of dread. When the twin booms appear, one Luftwaffe veteran said years later, you know someone will die. It wasn't superstition. It was pattern recognition. The Lightning had become synonymous with death. Yet for all its success, the Lightning had one more transformation to make, from interceptor to escort. As American bombing campaigns pushed deeper into Europe, the bombers needed protection all the way to the target and back. The Mustang would later perfect that role, but before it arrived, the burden fell on the Lightning. With external tanks and skilled pilots, it could stretch its range to reach Germany itself. The first missions were brutal. Over the Ruhr Valley, the Lightning groups faced waves of German fighters, outnumbered 3-1. The sky turned into chaos, tracers streaking, engines howling, metal colliding in midair. A P-38 dived to chase in Me-110 and was torn apart by flak. Another took a hit and lost one engine but stayed in the fight, the remaining propeller screaming as it limped home. By the time the bombers returned to England, half the escort group was missing. But the message had been sent. The Americans would not stop coming. One mission in particular became legend. December 1943, a raid on the ball bearing factories at Schweinfurt. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had into the defense. Over 200 fighters, some of the best aces in Germany. The Lightning squadrons met them head-on in the freezing high-altitude air. The battle lasted more than an hour, a dance of death across the clouds. Pilots described seeing aircraft everywhere, twisting, burning, colliding. The Lightning pilots fought until their ammo ran dry, then rammed or scattered to draw the Germans away from the bombers. Many didn't make it back. When the survivors landed, their faces were pale, their hands trembling. They had saved the bombers, but at a cost that would haunt them forever. After Schweinfurt, the Luftwaffe finally stopped laughing. Reports described the P-38 as a highly dangerous interceptor with exceptional range and armament. Field Marshal Göring himself ordered his men to find weaknesses. They found none. The Lightning could dive faster than their aircraft, climb higher, and take more punishment. Even its silhouette was hard to judge in combat, the twin tails creating illusions that made gunnery difficult. "You never knew where it was coming from," said one German ace. "You'd turn left and suddenly it was behind you. Turn right and it was already firing." For the men in the cockpits, though, the Lightning was more than a machine. It was a companion. It had quirks, moods, and sounds that pilots came to know like a living partner. The deep vibration of the twin Allisons at takeoff, the shuddering whine at altitude, the metallic echo of the guns firing, all became part of the rhythm of survival. Pilots gave their planes names: Marge, Forked Fury, Lucky Lady. They painted women, dice, angels on the noses. Every mark was a prayer, for luck, for love, for another dawn. One Lightning pilot wrote home, "When I fly her, I feel like I'm touching the edge of something divine. She's too fast, too perfect. Sometimes I think she knows what I'm thinking." He didn't make it back from his next mission. His squadron mates found only smoke on the horizon where he'd gone down. They said later that the clouds looked like wings folding. By early 1944, the Luftwaffe's domination of the sky was over. The Lightning had played its part in ending it. The same German pilots who had once mocked the twin-tailed plane now dreaded hearing its engines. Even on the ground, when American bombers approached and the escort fighters appeared overhead, German soldiers pointed up and said quietly, "Die Teufel sind hier." The devils are here. Back in the United States, Lockheed's engineers worked night and day, sending improvements, replacement parts, and new models to Europe. Kelly Johnson rarely slept. He listened to field reports, read pilot letters, and designed fixes with obsessive precision. "They're fighting for their lives," he said, "so I'll fight for theirs." He was right. Every improvement saved a man. Every new Lightning meant one more chance that someone would make it home. As winter turned to spring, the skies over Europe began to change color. The contrails no longer belonged to the Germans. The P-38s, now flying with Mustangs and Thunderbolts, dominated the air. The laughter that once greeted the strange twin-boom fighter had been replaced by silence, the silence of respect. The war still had a long way to go, but the tide had turned. And at the center of it all, gleaming in the high sun with its twin tails catching the light, was the aircraft they had called a joke. The aircraft that outflew, outgunned, and outlasted the best of the Reich. The Lightning had proven something deeper than engineering. It had proven imagination could be a weapon, and that sometimes, the strangest designs become legends. The P-38 Lightning had already earned a name across the Pacific and over North Africa, but Europe was where the real test awaited it. Against the cunning, seasoned Luftwaffe, against the unpredictable weather of the continent, and under the command of men who were learning, often too late, that innovation in war came at a deadly cost. By 1943, the Lightning's unmistakable twin-boom silhouette had become a symbol of dread to the Axis pilots who once mocked it. But before that transformation, before the awe and fear, there were lessons paid for in fire and lives. The early missions over Germany and France were brutal. The P-38s, flying long-range escort for bombers, were pushed to their mechanical limits. Freezing air at 30,000 feet made cockpit temperatures plummet below zero, and pilots struggled to stay conscious as frost bit at their fingers and oxygen masks iced over. The engines, fine-tuned for Pacific heat, began to freeze in the bitter European cold. Many P-38s returned home trailing smoke or not at all. The Luftwaffe was quick to take advantage. German pilots, masters of hit-and-run tactics, learned to dive through cloud cover and strike when the American fighters were forced to descend. At first, they called the Lightning der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil, half in mockery, half in reluctant respect. They laughed at its odd shape, its awkward twin booms, and the wide spacing of its propellers. But when the guns of a Lightning opened fire, there was nothing funny about it. 8.50 caliber machine guns, all mounted in the nose, meant the P-38 didn't have to aim like the others. There was no convergence point, no guessing the distance. Every bullet flew straight ahead in a dense stream of destruction. In one pass, a skilled pilot could turn an enemy aircraft into a cloud of debris. And when the Lightning dove, those same German pilots who mocked it learned just how deceptive its bulk could be. With both engines screaming and its sleek wings cutting through the air, the P-38 could hit speeds no German twin-engine fighter could match. It was fast, stable, and deadly. It was also the only Allied fighter that could escort bombers all the way from England into the heart of Germany and back again. That range made it invaluable, and made it a target. The Luftwaffe's best aces were ordered to seek out and destroy the Lightnings wherever they could. But the P-38 had something no German fighter could boast: versatility. It could climb like a rocket, dive like a meteor, and stay airborne long after others ran dry. Pilots learned to use those traits to their advantage, engaging the enemy only on their terms. One such pilot was Major Thomas Maguire, a quiet young man from New Jersey whose calm demeanor hit a deadly precision. Maguire studied the way Luftwaffe pilots fought, the angles, the turns, the hesitation after a pass, and he exploited them ruthlessly. In his Lightning, he developed tactics that would later become doctrine: high-altitude boom and zoom attacks, coordinated dives from the sun, and twin-engine spiral climbs that left single-engine foes spinning helplessly below. Maguire's squadron learned quickly that if you stayed patient, the Lightning could control the sky. And then came the missions that cemented its legend. Over the Mediterranean, Lightnings tangled with Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s in a deadly ballet of speed and steel. Dogfights lasted minutes but felt like hours. The air shimmered with tracers and oil smoke. Pilots shouted coordinates through static-filled radios, voices tight with adrenaline. When one Lightning went down, another dove threw flak to cover the pilot's parachute. That was how tight their bond was, the Lightning Brotherhood, they called it. Each man trusted the other with his life, because at 30,000 feet, trust was the only thing stronger than fear. German reports from that time tell a curious story. At first, they underestimated the P-38. They believed it too large to turn quickly, too heavy to maneuver in close combat. But after months of fighting, those same reports warned of its deadly climb rate, its unmatched range, and its ability to appear from nowhere. The twin-boom fighter, one Luftwaffe colonel wrote, is not to be engaged at high altitude unless in superior numbers. The joke had ended. The fear had begun. The Lightning's twin Allison engines roared across the skies of Italy, France, and Germany, escorting bombers deep into enemy territory. Their contrails stretched for miles, silver threads against the blue. Below, German soldiers watched and whispered prayers. The sight of dozens of Lightnings overhead meant one thing: the bombers were coming and there would be no mercy. American commanders noticed it too. They realized the Lightning could do more than fight. It could scout, photograph, and map enemy positions with astonishing precision. Cameras replaced guns and pilots flew deep reconnaissance missions, capturing every road, bridge, and railway between the front lines and Berlin. That intelligence saved countless lives. But not all missions were clean or easy. Many ended in tragedy. A single burst of flak could rip a wing apart. A lucky cannon shell could ignite the fuel tanks. Pilots often watched their friends vanish in flames, unable to help. Still they flew. They kept flying because they believed the Lightning was worth it, that every mission brought the war closer to its end. Somewhere over the Alps, a formation of P-38s once met a squadron of German FW-190s head-on. The sky exploded with gunfire. Tracers cut the air like streaks of lightning. For 20 minutes, chaos reigned. When it was over, 6 German fighters lay burning in the snow. The Lightnings returned home with bullet holes and oil leaks, but they were still flying. That battle, like so many others, proved what the world was beginning to understand. The P-38 was not a curiosity. It was a weapon of victory. And yet, the Lightning wasn't done. In the Pacific, it became something else entirely, the hunter of legends. But before that chapter could begin, Europe had to witness the full fury of the aircraft the Germans once laughed at. As 1944 dawned and the Allies prepared for D-Day, the P-38's role grew larger than anyone imagined. It was the first to fly over Normandy before the invasion, the first to photograph the beaches, the first to draw German flags so that others could follow. The pilots who flew it didn't see themselves as heroes. They were engineers in motion, trusting in a machine that defied all logic. A fighter that shot from 2 directions at once. And every time a German pilot thought he had it in his sights, the Lightning proved him wrong. Its twin tails blurred into the clouds, its nose guns flashing like thunder, and in that instant, laughter turned to silence. The skies of Europe, once owned by the Luftwaffe, now echoed with a new sound, the roar of the fork-tailed devil, the sound of victory in the making. The night that followed was unlike any other. A strange silence hung over the airfield, the kind that follows a storm when the world holds its breath. Inside the canvas tents of the 55th Fighter Group, men lay restless. Some tried to sleep, others wrote letters by candlelight, and a few simply stared at the black sky through the tent flaps, listening to the distant hum of engines that seemed to echo from another world. Captain Reed sat alone near the edge of the runway, his flight jacket drawn tight against the cold. His P-38 Lightning, Silver Ghost, rested a few yards away under a tarp, its twin tails gleaming faintly under the moonlight. He had flown too many missions, seen too many of his men go down in flames. Tonight, the air felt heavy, charged, as if the sky itself was waiting for something to happen. At dawn, the squadron was scheduled to escort bombers deep into German territory, Berlin. It was a mission few believed they'd return from. The Germans had tightened their defenses, radar was sharper, flak heavier, and new Messerschmitt jets had started appearing in the sky like silver ghosts of their own. As Reed stood, he could smell the faint scent of fuel and oil carried by the morning wind. The ground crew was already awake, moving like shadows around the planes. He nodded to Sergeant Mills, who was tightening a bolt on one of the propeller housings. "She'll be ready, Captain," Mills said without looking up. Reed smiled faintly. "She'd better be. We're heading into the lion's den." By 0500 hours, engines roared to life across the airfield. The sound was thunderous, like a dozen storms awakening at once. The P-38s taxied one by one onto the frost-covered runway, their lights blinking in the pre-dawn gloom. Reed climbed into his cockpit, feeling the familiar vibration of the twin Allison engines as they came alive beneath him. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the deep instinct of a man who had long accepted death as a companion. "This is Ghost Leader," he said into the radio, voice calm. "All flights, form up and climb to 20,000. Keep tight, keep quiet." As they lifted off, the world below dissolved into a gray mist. The rising sun cast long beams of light across the wings, illuminating frost crystals that glimmered like tiny stars. They flew eastward over the frozen fields of France, then over the Rhine, where flak bursts already dotted the horizon like black flowers blooming in the morning air. The bombers appeared ahead, B-17 flying fortresses, their engines droning in formation. The P-38 slid into escort position, each pilot scanning the skies. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high." The voice came sharp over the radio. Reed's head snapped up. He saw them, tiny black specks at first, then shapes, then wings. Messerschmitt Bf-109s diving from the sun. The trap was set. "Break formation. Cover the bombers." Reed shouted, pushing the throttle forward. The silver ghost lunged upward, and the world became a blur of light and speed. Tracers zipped past his canopy. He rolled hard left, then right, catching a 109 in his sights. The German pilot twisted sharply, but Reed fired, a long burst that tore through the fuselage. The enemy plane exploded into flame, spinning downward like a dying comet. There was no time to celebrate. Another enemy came screaming from above, guns blazing. Reed jerked the stick back, feeling G-forces crush his chest. His wingman, Lieutenant Harper, dove in behind the attacker, riddling its tail with bullets until it broke apart midair. "Nice shot, Harper," Reed yelled. "Don't thank me yet, Captain. We've got more coming in from the east." They did, dozens more. The sky became chaos. Planes twisted, fell, collided, burned. Reed saw two bombers go down, their crews bailing out in tiny parachutes that bloomed like white flowers. He could smell cordite, feel the heat of nearby explosions. Every second was survival. Every movement instinct. Suddenly his right engine coughed, hit by shrapnel. Warning lights blinked red. "Ghost Leader, you're smoking," came a voice. "I know," he snapped, struggling to keep control. The lightning shuddered, losing altitude fast. He saw a patch of open ground below, a field beyond the forest. "I'm bailing near the river," he shouted. "Tell command I'm down." He yanked the canopy release, wind howling into the cockpit. Then he jumped. The sky spun. The roar of the battle faded, replaced by the whisper of his parachute as it opened. Reed looked down and saw the land rushing up, a quilt of snow and trees. He hit hard, rolling through the snow, lungs burning. For a long moment he just lay there, listening to his heart pounding. Silence again. The kind that hides everything. His plane had crashed somewhere in the distance, a plume of smoke marking the spot. Reed got up slowly, his knees trembling. He checked his sidearm and compass. Somewhere behind enemy lines now, miles from the front. He could hear faint barking in the distance, German shepherds. Patrols. He moved quickly, crouching low, heading toward the forest. Each step crunched softly in the snow. Hours passed. The sound of planes faded, replaced by wind through the trees. Reed found a small abandoned farmhouse and slipped inside, collapsing by a cold fireplace. His hands were shaking, not from fear but exhaustion. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small photograph, his wife, Anna, smiling in sunlight. The corners were worn from being touched too often. He closed his eyes. Just one more flight, he whispered to himself. Then home. But deep down, he knew home felt 1,000 miles away, and the war had a way of swallowing promises. That night, he heard footsteps outside. Boots crunching on snow. He held his breath, pistol ready. The door creaked open slowly. A shadow entered, then froze. A voice, low and hesitant, spoke in accented English. "Don't shoot. I'm not your enemy." Reed lowered the gun slightly. A young man stepped into the light, thin, wearing a German medic's coat, his hands raised. "I saw your plane go down," the man said softly. "You will not survive long out here. Call me." Reed stared, unsure whether to trust him. But the man's eyes, calm, tired, held something familiar. "Humanity. Why are you helping me?" Reed asked. Because my brother flies too, the medic replied. Somewhere above us. Perhaps he fights you. Perhaps not. But he is still my brother. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Reed nodded slowly. All right, he said. Lead the way. They slipped through the trees under moonlight, two soldiers on opposite sides, bound by something older than war, the need to survive to see home again. By dawn, they reached a small barn hidden among the pines. The medic handed Reed bread and water, then motioned for silence. German patrols passed nearby, their voices sharp and cold. Reed could hear the clink of rifles, the crunch of snow, the snarl of dogs. He didn't move. When the sounds faded, he exhaled slowly. You saved my life, he whispered. The medic smiled faintly. Then maybe one day you save someone else's. Outside, the first light of morning touched the snow, painting it gold. For a brief, fragile moment, the war seemed far away. But they both knew it wasn't over. The sky would soon thunder again, engines would roar, and men would once more climb into metal coffins for a cause they barely understood. Yet in that silent dawn, amid the ruins of Europe, two strangers shared bread and peace, and for the first time in a long while, Captain Reed believed there might still be something